There's a place where speed isn't the greatest challenge. It's the consequence. A course that was never built for racing, yet somehow became one of the most extreme environments on Earth. Ordinary roads, transformed into something where control is never absolute, and where every decision carries real weight. And the faster these riders go, the more the world around them disappears, until only what matters remains. No distractions, no margin, no room to correct. But if everything there demands absolute precision, why would anyone choose to be in that place? How can an environment this unpredictable be described as freedom? And at what point does this stop being a race and become something far deeper? Because when you enter this course, it's not just the speed that changes, it's the way you see everything, and there's no going back. No one arrives at the Tourist Trophy by accident. Before any race, before any extreme speed, there is repetition, there is memory, there is a slow, almost invisible process of learning that has nothing heroic about it. Years spent memorizing every corner, every incline, every imperfection in the asphalt. Because here, unlike anywhere else, making a mistake isn't a possibility, it's a consequence. And this isn't theory, it's constant practice. As the riders themselves describe it, the learning never ends. Even after countless laps, the course never stops teaching. You're always learning the course, no matter how many laps you've done. That's not a motivational quote, it's a warning, because it means control is never absolute. Never. The TT doesn't take place on a closed circuit. It happens on public roads. That means poles, walls, houses, everything stays exactly where it has always been. There's no runoff area, there's no margin. And that's why, no matter how much someone tries to romanticize it, the foundation of all this begins in an uncomfortable place. You don't learn how to race. You learn how not to make mistakes. For over a century, riders have come to the Isle of Man trying to master something that, in practice, has never been fully controllable. The history itself makes that clear. Since 1907, more than 200 riders have lost their lives on the island's roads. That number isn't a detail. It's part of the structure. It's there from the very first contact with the TT. And as that understanding deepens, something starts to shift. Because at some point, it stops feeling like a race and starts to feel like something else. An environment where mistakes are simply not forgiven, where every decision carries absolute weight, where continuing to push the throttle isn't impulse, it's a choice. And even so, they keep coming back, because what's built here isn't confidence in the usual sense. It's something else. It's a nearly silent relationship between rider and road, a kind of absolute respect, not for victory, but for the mountain, for the course, for the constant risk. In the end, what stands out the most isn't the courage. It's the fact that no one arrives here ready. They build themselves slowly, inside something that, from the very beginning, already feels wrong. But if all of this is already known, if the risk is obvious, why do they keep choosing to be there? There's an invisible point within the TT where the race stops being physical and becomes mental. And that point happens long before the start, because no rider gets there without fully understanding exactly what they're stepping into. The TT hides nothing from anyone. The history is open. The numbers are public. Over a century of racing and a course of approximately 37 miles, about 60 kilometers, on public roads with more than 200 corners that were never designed for racing, but for the everyday use of an island. And it's precisely this combination that makes everything different. There's no comfortable repetition here. Every section has its own identity. There are stretches where the asphalt completely changes texture within a matter of feet, sections where the light disappears because of the trees, open areas where crosswinds directly interfere with the bike's stability at extreme speed. And all of this unfolds while the rider easily pushes past 186 miles per hour, over 300 kilometers per hour, on a machine that demands absolute precision in every movement. It's in this environment that the first decision happens. And it's not technical, it's psychological. And that becomes clear in the words of rider Guy Martin. "I don't want to die, but I accept it could happen." That statement isn't about courage, it's about clarity, about understanding the risk in its rawest form and still choosing to continue. That's the breaking point. Because from the moment the rider accepts that reality, something shifts in the way they perceive the world around them. Fear stops being paralyzing and gives way to a kind of focus that doesn't exist in any other category of motorsport. It's not ordinary concentration, it's a state where the brain strips away everything that isn't essential. And as speed builds, that filtering intensifies. Beyond 186 miles per hour, the world is no longer processed as a complete environment. It simplifies, it compresses, Riders describe this experience in almost identical terms. Reality breaks down into two fundamental elements: the gray of the road and the green around it. Everything else stops mattering, because any distraction, no matter how small, can mean the end. And this doesn't happen by conscious choice. It's adaptation. The brain finds a way to deal with an environment where the volume of information is simply too high to process in a traditional way. But while this is happening inside the rider's mind, outside, the environment keeps shifting nonstop. The TT offers no consistency. Every corner demands a different read. Some are blind, others tighten more than they appear. There are sections where the bike has to lift slightly due to irregularities in the asphalt, momentarily losing contact with the ground. And even then, the line must be held with millimeter precision. And unlike circuits like MotoGP, where the environment is controlled, predictable, and built for performance, here, the rider is constantly reacting to variables that can't be fully anticipated. At the TT, there is no absolute control. There is continuous adaptation, and that difference completely transforms the nature of riding. Because while in other categories, a mistake can be corrected, here, it isn't absorbed, it's amplified. And that also shows in the words of Guy Martin: when it goes wrong, it's not a crash, it's a catastrophe. That line isn't an exaggeration. It describes a structural reality of the TT, and that's exactly why the contradiction starts to take shape. Off the bike, everything points to tension. The history of the race, the accidents, the pressure to perform, the constant awareness of risk. But the moment the rider gets on the bike and starts to accelerate, that logic flips, because all the noise disappears. And that becomes clear in the words of Michael Dunlop: once you're on a bike, you've got freedom. Freedom. That word feels out of place in this context, but it's exactly how many riders describe the experience. And this is the hardest part to understand from the outside. How can the most dangerous environment feel like the most liberating? The answer lies in the mental state the TT demands. There's no room for distraction, hesitation, or prolonged doubt. Every decision is immediate. Every action has a direct consequence. And that creates a level of presence that barely exists outside this environment. The rider isn't thinking about what happened before or what might happen next. They are completely locked into the moment. And the faster they go, the more intense that state becomes. There's a kind of mental silence that emerges in the middle of chaos, a point where everything aligns. And it's exactly at that point that the TT stops being just a race. Because for many riders, it begins to feel like something more, something tied to identity. Because it's not just about winning, not even about finishing the race. At a certain point, the objective changes. And that's exactly what some descriptions capture with precision. At certain stages of the race, it stops feeling like a competition and starts to resemble a survival experience. Not in the sense of constant fear, but in the sense of absolute awareness that every second matters, and that staying on the correct line is the only thing that matters in that moment. And this is where the TT reveals its deepest layer, because the rider isn't just reacting to the physical environment. They are operating within an extreme mental state, where any lapse in attention can be decisive. And even so, they choose to be there, lap after lap, year after year, fully aware of what's at stake. And maybe that's exactly what makes the TT impossible to replicate. It's not just the course, not just the speed, not just the risk. It's the combination of all of it, inside the mind of someone who has chosen to accept it. And once that decision is made, there is no middle ground. You're either all in, or you shouldn't be there at all. And maybe it's exactly at that point that the TT stops being a race. Because when someone accepts that level of risk, that level of focus, and that level of commitment, the question stops being why they come back and becomes something else. What is it about this place that awakens something in these riders that the rest of the world simply cannot offer? There comes a point where everything that's been said so far stops being enough. Speed and risk don't explain it. Not even skill can fully explain what happens at the TT. From the very beginning, the Tourist Trophy has always carried something different. Over more than a century, riders keep returning to the Isle of Man, not just to compete, but to place themselves in front of something that demands more than technique. The historical record itself makes that clear. The TT has always involved a level of commitment that goes beyond the traditional logic of sport. And maybe that's why it endures. While the world around it has evolved to make everything safer, more predictable, and more controlled, the TT has remained almost unchanged through all these years. Raw, exposed, real, or, as many describe it, the last race that still remains truly wild, in a world that insists on controlling everything. And that's exactly what creates this almost magnetic pull. What these riders find there doesn't exist anywhere else. It's not about adrenaline. It's not about victory. It's about identity. At some point, it stops being something they do and becomes something they are. And that completely shifts the perspective. Because when you find an environment that demands everything from you, absolute focus, extreme precision, total acceptance of risk, it begins to reveal something that rarely surfaces in ordinary life. Clarity. A brutal clarity, no distractions, no noise. Nothing but what truly matters in that exact moment. And maybe that's exactly what the rest of the world can't offer. Outside of it, everything is diluted. Decisions are postponed, consequences are softened, limits are rarely truly tested. But at the TT, everything is immediate, everything is final. And it's in this kind of environment that some people find meaning. Even if that meaning comes with a price, most wouldn't be willing to pay. More than 200 lives have already been lost there. That's not a historical detail. It's a constant presence, something that's part of the TT's identity, whether people accept it or not. And even so, they come back, not because they ignore it, but because they understand it. And above all, they respect the island and the decisions it imposes, and they choose it anyway. In the end, the TT isn't about defying death. It's about something far harder to explain. It's about finding a place where everything makes sense, even if that meaning only exists for a few minutes. At over 186 miles per hour, more than 300 kilometers per hour, on a road where there is no room for error. And that's why trying to explain the TT as just a race will never be enough. Because this isn't just speed. It's not just risk. It's not just competition. This is choice. This is obsession. This is identity. And maybe it's the most extreme way there is to feel truly alive. Now let me ask you something. What matters more to you? Safety or feeling truly alive? Is the TT something that should be protected or something that has already crossed the line and shouldn't exist anymore? If this video kept you hooked until now, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you can keep exploring stories of extreme challenges, impossible races, and people who push beyond the limit. And look, there's another video appearing on your screen right now. Click on it, and I'll see you there. Keep exploring. The world doesn't stop, and neither do we.